Hello everyone and welcome to this pen and watercolour sketching video. This video is put together from a sketch I did in October 2022 on a very sunny and beautiful day in Scarborough on the northeast coast of England. I did the sketch on an A5 Etcher watercolour sketchbook using a Rotring art pen which had permanent black ink in it. I was able to record the painting sequence when I got back home. I used Winsor Newton artist quality paint. I would recommend anybody to use artist quality, not particularly Winsor Newton, any brand. Artist quality paint is good for lifting, so that is removing paint when you put too much on. Some of the student quality paints are chemical and they tend to stain more. If you want to work along with this sketch, I've put a copy of the drawing on my website, and if you look at the comments below this video, you'll see a link to get there and download that drawing, and you can trace it or use it to create your own drawing. Remember, this is an A5 sketchbook, so it's not very big. I've got a very wet mix of French ultramarine, and I'm applying it using a number 10 brush. And I'm going across the clouds as the sky, and I'm leaving bits for clouds. At this stage I'm not being that careful, although I am trying to keep the sky basically up above the buildings, but I'm not bothered if bits fall, if water goes into the buildings. This wash is going to dry back very lightly. I like to mix in the palette and I like to mix on the paper, and I've mixed a grey with burnt sienna and French ultramarine. And I'm going to mix that into this wet ultramarine sky. There it goes, wet in wet. Just let the paper and the watercolour and the water do their magic. And I'll get myself a little bit of just burnt sienna and let that mix in. See, it goes on looking like burnt sienna, but in a moment it'll look like a grey sky because it'll mix with the ultramarine. And you try and get the sky in this one wash really, and the danger is you overdo it, and you mustn't overdo it, and it's difficult to know when to stop, but I don't know if I'll do any more here, but that's enough. Normally I'll let a wash just dry, but if you are so bothered about something like a lot of water there and you're going to use a tissue, never rub, always just dab. I'm going to mix on the paper here ultramarine into the road. Nice and wet mix still. Some cobalt violet, just mix it in and let it work together. Bit of burnt sienna, mixing the road. And again, don't worry too much if it goes over the pen lines that you've got. The beauty of a permanent pen the beauty of permanent ink is that the watercolour shows through. The beauty of the permanent ink is that the ink lines show through. Raw sienna and cobalt violet for the pavement here. When I sketch, I'm really trying to tell two stories. One is the story of how I did the sketch, and I love to see the skeleton ink lines at the end. And the second story I'm trying to tell, in this case, is of that beautiful sunny afternoon in Scarborough. Beautiful October sunny afternoon. It was very busy. It was a lovely day visit. This is raw sienna, a little bit of burnt sienna. Not too bothered about the ink lines here, just covering that mass of buildings at the far end with raw sienna and burnt sienna. A little bit of green, and I haven't got a green in my palette, so I mix my greens, and this is a mixture of Prussian blue and lemon yellow. Let's just put, and that's a light green, Prussian blue and lemon yellow. The big building on the left's that beautiful old grand hotel that's there. I don't know who owns it now. In the 90s it was a Butlins hotel for a while. It's a lovely seaside town, Scarborough. And for the North Sea, I'm using Prussian blue. And I don't mind that green running into the sea. I say I don't mind them. That's the beauty of watercolour, these things that happen. They give it such a lovely, sketchy, untidy feel. And you get some beautiful mixes that you never intended, and you're very lucky when they happen. I've let that dry, the first wash, before I work any more into it, because I'm going to go with smaller brushes and stronger pigments, so we're working from light to dark. I've actually picked up my rigger straight away, and that's a mixture, cadmium orange, a little bit of burnt sienna in it. And it'll just kind of work very well against that ultramarine blue. Beautiful combination. See that rigger brush? That's well, it's probably a sable synthetic mix, but it's probably a number 2, and oh no, it's not. That's a number 5. And you see the length of the hairs are so springy. It's beautiful. And that's the grey. That's French ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Again, in a stronger mix, a stronger pigment, and I'm just doing the roof of that big grand hotel. See, that's quite dark. And I'm taking care now of the drawing at this stage. We're bringing it up from light to dark. Light to dark, that's how we work these sketches. Just see how the sky's dried so beautifully. Just dried so beautifully. And I'm putting some Prussian blue in there. On top of the green foliage at the left of that large hotel. And it's transparent and the green below is showing through. And while that's still wet, add a little bit of, I think that's burnt sienna. Quite a dark green mix, a good dark green mix, is Prussian blue and burnt sienna. That's more of the grey that I'm putting in there. So I'm just taking colours from my palette and adding them and letting them all run together on the sketch. I'm looking for more dark roofs there. There we go. There's got to be some more. Lovely skyline, lovely view this as you just come round the bend. If we went out of the picture to the right, we'd walk round to the North Bay, which is a lovely little walk. We actually did it after lunch. That's still French ultramarine and burnt sienna, but more on the burnt sienna side. So you can vary those mixes. You can put more of one than the other in, and you get a different colour. Maybe the same tone, but slightly different colour. Let's get these roofs in now. I'm being careful now, see, to make sure that I don't run into the foliage above. We've let it dry so that I keep the roof looking like a roof. Just mucky greys, burnt sienna, French ultramarine, various combinations. Quite dark there, looking for the shadows. And deciding that'll be like that, all in shadow. This white house on the right, a lovely compositional position to have a spot of white that will keep there. So that would be beautiful. Not too tidy this, if you notice. I'm not bothered about leaving white, leaving gaps. And in sketches like this, I love to see that at the end. Still looking for my darks there on that massive buildings. There's an artist, John Yardley, and he says, if you see a jumble, paint a jumble. And it's one of the, and that's a really good piece of advice, that you try not to, it's not a jigsaw, you're not putting that building in, but see it all as a whole. And if it looks a jumble, paint it a jumble, impressionistic. The viewer will make the connections. You don't need to be too specific. Suggest rather than be too precise. Letting that wash dry now. Same brush, darker green. Prussian blue and burnt sienna, a lot on the Prussian blue side, and a touch of Prussian blue and raw sienna gives it a slightly lighter but dark green. So it's combinations of that, and then I'm just adding more on the Prussian blue side green in there. Looking where else I can put it. It's always good when you're painting, when you're sketching and painting like this, and painting, to just look where else you can put that colour. You don't want it just in one place on the picture. Having said that, I bet we end up with it. We should, and I'm sure I remember doing it, go to the right and get some dark green underneath the house. There, that's the light green, that's lemon yellow and Prussian blue. And it's just, we're just dropping it in and letting it mix with what was already there. So let that do the mixing. That's a very dark green, and that is Prussian blue and burnt umber. So not burnt sienna, burnt umber, a very dark brown. This dark, even darker mix is Prussian blue and burnt umber. And that really mixes the darkest colour that I've got in my palette, because I don't have a black. Prussian blue and burnt umber looks black. Got the watchtower there, or lighthouse, or whatever it is. Lovely little bit of white against the darker tones behind it. Don't mind all them running. Don't mind, I'm glad. Make those connections when you're painting with a sketch. A bit darker on the right side of the building. And again, I don't mind it dropping down into the foliage. I'm looking and I'm thinking, where do we see that colour? And which bits should we leave white? And really, you're not just looking at the picture now. You're looking at your composition. So you might leave buildings white that aren't white because it suits the composition to get that highlight, that variation in tone at that point. It's a really good tip that by the time you get to this bit, you're as much working on your picture and making that work as you are in trying to produce an accurate depiction of what's in front of you. We're not making a photograph, we're making a sketch that will tell the story and the mood of that lovely sunny day. Get some red in there. Constable again would be very proud of us. Now that mix is a burnt sienna with just a grey mix from the palette. So again, it's difficult to say exactly what that is, but by now my palette has got a lot of different mixes in it, and just mix them, just put them on the paper and mix on the paper. You see I'm adding that Prussian blue and burnt umber, I think, that very dark green for this interesting plant here. Bit of light green on top. I like the ragged edges on my sketches. I don't go to the ends of the sketchbook paper. I like that ragged appeal. I think it goes with this type of sketching. I love the untidiness of these sketches, these impressionistic sketches. Just getting some primary colours in there on the people now. I'm not sure that red and yellow are in October in Scarborough. Got the red on that banner or canopy. Got some raw sienna. See how my pigment's much thicker than it was in the very first wash, much thicker. Raw sienna, touch of burnt sienna in because it's quite red, so in that way I didn't mind that red mixing in. I thought, well, actually that's good. I didn't plan that, but I liked it. Where else I can add it? Is there any other buildings? I don't want to lose too much white. That's always my concern when I'm doing this. Cobalt turquoise light there on that sign, that sign that's in front of the White House, and a bit of cobalt turquoise light on some of the people. Just got myself a dark grey there, and I'm adding some of the shadows. So my sun is coming from the right. And that lets me put these lovely darks that will ground the people and ground that minibus, that red minibus. And don't be too pedantic. Work quickly on these shadows. Get them to be very energetic, and your rigger brush will help you do that. A shadow on the curb there, not very much. We don't need to be too scientific about it. Get them going in roughly the right direction. That shadow mix is ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and anything else that happens to have dropped in there from the palette. Let's indicate a shadow from the fence. Lovely, lovely to get some variations in light and dark in this front left section. a little bit of that grey on the lamp, the top of the lamp posts. Maybe a little bit there. Just little touches working across the whole sketch with that brush and that grey. Can't get the bridge yet too wet. Let's burnt sienna, people. Burnt sienna and whatever's in that mix. So I keep saying whatever's in the mix. My palette is a mix now of many things, but there's only a few colours, and that's why you can get away with this. You can add things because there's a harmony. I mean, we haven't used 30 different colours here, we've only used a few. And they may run together, but they work together. And now we'll let that dry, just let that dry a bit. I do that from time to time, just let it dry. Especially when you get down to this stage where some of the paint you put on, you want it to stay in very small areas. In the process, it's hard to know when and where to do this or that, and it also all depends on how you're feeling. You can paint this over 2 days, you can paint it in an hour, you might even paint it in less if you get yourself a hairbrush. You might even paint it in less if you get yourself a hairdryer and dry when you need to. Just add in some boxes and things that are on the key side, just to get variation in tone. French ultramarine and burnt sienna, they're very dark. Very thick mix as well. You can see there's not much water. Well, there's very little water in that. It's not running very far, so I'm down to quite thick mixes now. Prussian blue and burnt sienna, but again a very thick mix. More pigment in the mixes now at this stage. Remember, we bring it up from light to dark, and so these are the darker tones. It's kind of a metal bridge there, and we will get that in. It's in the pen, so it stays there in the pen, which is beautiful, but we'll add a little bit of colour to it, but not whilst the watercolour around it is all wet. We'll add a dark mix of French ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and a little bit of cobalt violet in there. And we'll do the roof of that hotel and the right hand side, which is in shade. There's a Uruguayan watercolour artist called Alvaro Castañer, who I think is a superb artist. And I probably say this with every video, but he says that you get the light when you paint the dark. And I think it's so true. when you start to put the dark colours in, the light appears. We'll get some dark greens under that interesting plant that's in front of the house. And that's a mixture now of Prussian blue, burnt umber, burnt sienna, and anything else that's in my palette. A raw sienna-y kind of colour on those chimney pots. Maybe a bit of burnt sienna stuck in them. Remember what Alvaro says, you get the light when you paint the dark, and these are the shadows that these houses are casting. Signpost there. And then back to these people. Let's give them some, see if we can get them to be animated. I really have worked hard on my people. I try not to be too stiff when I work with them. I work quickly, I try and get movement, and I'm not bothered about physical accuracy. Again, it's an impression, and the impression I want to give is not just of people, but of a happy crowd walking the seafront. So if some only have one leg or don't have two arms, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. In a sketch like this, it's just the feel and the mood and the idea of movement. There's a sign there, which I guess the base of that is ultramarine blue, but it looks a bit contaminated. Always remember, it's not a photograph. It's a sketch. It's an impression of how you felt and what it looked like to you, how it made you feel. I always feel very good when I go to the seaside, especially the northeast coast of England where I'm from. I did struggle to find a crab sandwich though. I wonder if it's something to do with the disease that's spreading along the northeast coast among the crustaceans. These final bits, the watercolour artist Joseph Zabukovich would call adding the jewellery. Rigger brushes are lovely for this kind of work. I try and hold them quite away from the bristles to keep the looseness in the sketch. Decided to go for a slightly darker cloud there, so I'll have added a lot of water to that wash. And just add some dark cloud in. Just water that down too dark, and down at the bottom here I'll need to just feather that away. Deepen that minibus. Dark in that jumble of buildings, just to pop out the light parts. This is a white gel pen, and I use it to recover some of my whites when I think I've gone too far with the paint. You could do that with acrylic, you could do it with gouache, you can do it with a white gel pen. There are many options, and it's just recovering some light. Get a bit of light on that stone wall in front of the White House. Bit of light on some of the people, highlights where the sun hits them. Yeah, our white building, we lost quite a lot of that, and let's bring that back. It's like a modern 60s block building. I say modern 60s, it's not modern now, is it? That some of the windows in the roof of the hotel. And again, a suggestion where the sun hits. I lost a lot of that white building in the wash. Bring it back. I think I'm enjoying using it and just looking for things to do now. Don't want to overdo it. Oh, I haven't finished yet. Here we go. This is a dark green, which will be Prussian blue, and probably raw sienna, just to try and bring that bridge a bit more into view. Go back with my pen. You can always go back with your pen afterwards. There's my Rotring art pen. And just because I do that because the watercolour will mute some of the lines, even though they stay there, and some of them you want them to really pop out.